The dust devil spun across the parched earth, just beyond the wagon where Willa Zimmerman crouched with a tin cup in her trembling hands, watching the dark clouds roll across the Nebraska sky with the desperate hope of someone who had not tasted fresh water in 2 days. She was 22 years old and alone. Her father buried 3 weeks back near the Kansas border after fever took him. Her mother lost to childbirth when Willa was barely old enough to remember her face. The homestead claim her father had filed sat another 40 miles west, but the oxen had died in the heat, and she had been walking, pulling what she could in a small handcart, rationing the last of her water until the canteen ran dry yesterday morning. The first drops hit her face like a benediction, and she gasped, tilting her head back and opening her mouth to catch what she could. It was not enough, would never be enough this way, so she scrambled to set out every container she had, the tin cup, a small pot. A canvas tarp she stretched between the wagon and a wheel to create a makeshift collection system. The rain fell harder, and she laughed, actually laughed, as she watched the water pool in the tarp's center, dripping into the pot below. Her dress was soaked through in moments, her dark blonde hair plastered to her face, but she did not care because there was water, blessed water, and she would not die of thirst today. She did not hear the horse approach over the sound of the rain drumming against the wagon's canvas cover. Did not see the rider until he was nearly upon her, sitting astride a big roan gelding, watching her with an expression somewhere between concern and curiosity. He was perhaps 25 or 26, wearing a battered hat that channeled water off its brim in streams, a dark shirt plastered to broad shoulders, and the unmistakable look of a man who had spent his life working cattle and surviving the hard country. "Madam," he called over the rain, and Willa spun toward him, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle leaning against the wagon wheel, though she did not grab it. He raised one hand slowly, palm out. "Mean you no harm, just wondering if you need help." "I am managing," she called back, though her voice shook and they both knew it was a lie. She looked half-starved, sun-burned and desperate, and managing was the last thing she was doing. He swung down from his horse with an easy grace, leading the animal closer. Up close, she could see his face more clearly, weathered and tanned, with dark eyes under the shadow of his hat brim and a jaw that had not seen a razor in several days. There was something solid about him, something that made her think of oak trees and stone foundations, things that endured. "How long you been out here?" he asked, his voice gentler now, not pushing, just asking. "4 days on my own," she said. "Longer before that." He looked at the pathetic collection of containers, at the way she was trying to catch rainwater like it was gold dust, and something shifted in his expression. "Fort Kearney is 2 miles that way," he said, pointing southeast. "Got a well there, got supplies, people, everything you need." "I have a claim to reach," Willa said, lifting her chin even though exhaustion made her sway on her feet. 40 miles west. My father filed it before he passed." "You will not make 40 miles in your condition," the cowboy said bluntly. "And that claim will still be there after you have rested and gotten yourself properly supplied." He paused, watching the rain fill her pot drop by precious drop. "There is a well in Fort Kearney. Good, clean water, cold even in summer. You do not have to catch rainwater to drink." Something in the way he said it, matter of fact but kind, made Willa's throat tighten. She had been alone for so long, fighting so hard, and here was someone offering help with no demands attached to it, at least none she could see yet. "I have no money for lodging," she said quietly. "Boarding house owner, Mrs. Patterson. She has a kind heart. I reckon we can work something out." He extended his hand. "Name is Hayes Fletcher. Work for the Running Creek Ranch about 5 miles north of town. She looked at his hand for a long moment before taking it. His grip was warm and calloused, steady. Willa Zimmerman. Miss Zimmerman, let me get you into town before this rain lets up and you are back to Dry Gulch again. You can bring whatever fits on my horse, and I will come back with a wagon for the rest tomorrow if you like. Willa wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was she could not. The truth was she was frightened and exhausted and so very tired of being alone. So she nodded, and together they loaded what they could into his saddlebags and bedroll. And then he helped her up onto the horse before swinging up behind her, his arms solid around her waist to keep her steady. The ride to Fort Kearney took less than 30 minutes, but Willa barely registered the journey. She was too focused on not sliding off the horse, on the warmth of Hayes Fletcher's presence behind her, on the fact that she was going toward civilization again instead of away from it. The town materialized out of the rain like something from a dream, a collection of wooden buildings along a muddy main street, smoke rising from chimneys despite the summer storm, lights glowing in windows. Hayes guided the horse to a 2-story building with a painted sign declaring it the Fort Kearney boarding house, and he dismounted first before reaching up to help Willa down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and his hands steadied her instantly. "Easy," he said. "You have been pushing too hard for too long." A woman appeared in the doorway, gray-haired and plump, her face creased with concern. "Hayes Fletcher, what have you brought me in this weather?" "Someone who needs help, Mrs. Patterson. This is Miss Zimmerman. She has been on her own for days, and she needs food, rest, and probably a doctor to look her over." Mrs. Patterson clucked her tongue and ushered them both inside, out of the rain. The interior was warm and smelled of bread and coffee, and Willa's stomach clenched painfully at the scent. "Poor child, you are half drowned and look half starved besides. Come, let us get you dried off and fed." "I cannot pay," Willa said again, hating how small her voice sounded. "We will figure that out later," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Right now you need caring for, and that is what matters." She looked at Hayes. "You staying for supper?" "No, madam. Got to get back to the ranch before full dark, but I will check in tomorrow, see how Miss Zimmerman is faring." He looked at Willa, touched the brim of his hat. "You rest up. Everything else can wait." He was gone before she could thank him properly, back out into the rain, and Willa found herself staring at the closed door, feeling oddly bereft. Mrs. Patterson guided her upstairs to a small but clean room, provided her with a towel and a dry dress that was too large but infinitely better than her soaked clothing, and then brought her downstairs to the dining room where a bowl of stew and fresh bread appeared before her like a miracle. Willa tried to eat slowly, but hunger won out and she devoured everything on the plate. "There now," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into the chair across from her. "Tell me your story, child. How did you end up out there alone?" So Willa told her. About her father's dream of a homestead, about the fever that took him, about the oxen dying and her determination to reach the claim because it was all she had left of him. Mrs. Patterson listened with a sympathy that made Willa's eyes sting with tears she was too tired to shed. "That claim will still be there," the older woman said, echoing Hayes's words. "But you need strength before you can start farming alone. It is hard work for a man with help, near impossible for a woman alone." "I will manage," Willa said, because she had to. "I do not doubt your determination," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "But determination does not plow fields or build cabins. You need help, and there is no shame in that." Willa wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her like a tide, and Mrs. Patterson seemed to sense it. She guided Willa back upstairs, tucked her into a real bed with clean sheets, and Willa was asleep before the door closed. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of bacon frying. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic spiked through her before memory returned. Fort Kearney. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. Hayes Fletcher with his steady hands and kind eyes. She dressed in her own clothes, cleaned and dried overnight, and made her way downstairs to find the dining room occupied by several other boarders. Mrs. Patterson served her breakfast without comment about payment, and Willa ate more slowly this time, savoring every bite. After breakfast, Mrs. Patterson pulled her aside. "I spoke with Reverend Thompson this morning. The church needs someone to help with cleaning and mending. It does not pay much, but it would cover your room and board here with a little left over, if you are interested." Willa felt relief wash through her. "Yes. Thank you, I will work hard." "I do not doubt it." Mrs. Patterson patted her hand. "Now, Hayes Fletcher left word he would be by this afternoon to take you to retrieve the rest of your things. In the meantime, why do not you come with me? I will show you the well he mentioned." They walked together through the town, Mrs. Patterson pointing out the various establishments: the general store, the blacksmith, the saloon, the church, and then to the center of the small square where a stone well stood, its bucket hanging on a rope, water dark and cool in its depths. "This is yours to use too," Mrs. Patterson said, echoing Hayes's words from yesterday. "Everyone in Fort Kearney uses this well. It never runs dry, not even in the worst droughts. You do not have to catch rainwater anymore, child. You have a community now, whether you planned on it or not." Willa reached out and touched the sun-warmed stone, feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen. She drew up a bucket of water, and it was cold and sweet, the best thing she had tasted in weeks. She drank deeply, then looked at Mrs. Patterson. "Why are you all being so kind to me?" "Because out here we take care of our own," the older woman said simply. "And because most of us arrived the same way you did, desperate, alone, and in need of help. We do not forget that." Hayes arrived that afternoon driving a wagon, his hat pulled low against the sun, and Willa climbed up onto the seat beside him for the ride back to where she had left her wagon and belongings. The day was bright and hot, yesterday's rain already evaporating from the hard, packed earth, and Hayes kept the horses to a steady pace. "You look better," he observed. "Got some color back in your face." "Mrs. Patterson fed me enough for 3 people, Willa said, "and I slept in a real bed." "Those things will do wonders." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "She tell you about the church job?" "She did. I start tomorrow." "Good. Reverend Thompson is a decent man, works you hard but fair." They rode in companionable silence for a while, and Willa found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. In the daylight, she could see more details: the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the competent way his hands held the reins. He had an air of quiet capability, the kind of man who did what needed doing without complaint. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "Yesterday in the rain," Hayes considered the question. "Would have been wrong not to. You needed help and I was there. Most people would have ridden on by." "Then most people are fools," he glanced at her. "Besides, my mother raised me better than that. God rest her soul. She passed 6 years ago, influenza. My father went 2 years before that, got kicked by a horse and never recovered." He said it plainly, without self-pity. "That is how life goes out here sometimes. I am sorry. Life goes on. You work, you survive, you find the good where you can." He pulled the wagon to a stop beside her abandoned wagon and jumped down. "Let us get you loaded up." They worked together to transfer her belongings to his wagon: her father's tools, her mother's quilt, the few dishes and supplies she had left, the small wooden box containing the deed to the homestead claim. Hayes handled everything carefully, and when they were done, he looked at the old wagon. "I can probably sell this for you in town," Won't it be much, but it will be something. That would be helpful, thank you. On the ride back, Hayes asked about her plans. Willa explained about the homestead claim, about her determination to make it work somehow, and he listened without interrupting. 40 miles west is rough country, he said finally. Not much out there. Nearest neighbor would be 10 miles at least, maybe more. You thought about what that means, being alone out there? I have been thinking about little else, Willa admitted. But that land is all I have left of my father's dream. I cannot just abandon it. Hayes nodded slowly. I understand that, but there is no shame in waiting, building up resources, maybe finding help before you go. I will think about it, Willa said, though in her heart, she knew she could not wait forever. Over the next several weeks, Willa settled into a routine in Fort Kearney. She worked for Reverend Thompson during the mornings, cleaning the church and mending the altar cloths and choir robes, and she helped Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house in the afternoons. The work was hard but honest, and slowly, she began to save a little money. Slowly, she began to feel like herself again. Hayes Fletcher became a regular presence in her life, though she could not quite determine if it was intentional or coincidence. He seemed to find reasons to come into town several times a week, always stopping by to check on her, always asking if she needed anything. He brought her fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, helped her repair a broken trunk, taught her how to shoot properly when he noticed her rifle's sight was off. If you are going to live alone on a homestead, you need to know how to handle a gun, he said one Sunday afternoon, setting up targets behind the church. Not just carry one. Willa had protested that she knew how to shoot, but Hayes had just given her a patient look, and she had relented. He was right, of course. Her father had shown her the basics, but Hayes showed her how to actually hit what she aimed at, how to maintain the rifle, how to stay calm when her heart was racing. She found herself looking forward to his visits, found herself watching the road into town on the days she thought he might appear. It was dangerous, she knew, letting herself feel this way about him. She had nothing to offer, no future beyond a hard-scrabble homestead and uncertain survival. But her heart did not seem to care about logic. One evening in early August, nearly 6 weeks after Hayes had found her in the rain, he arrived at the boarding house just as Willa was finishing the supper dishes. Mrs. Patterson shooed them both out onto the porch with glasses of lemonade and a knowing smile that made Willa's cheeks heat. They sat on the steps watching the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Hayes was quieter than usual. Something on your mind? Willa asked finally. He took a long drink of lemonade, then set the glass down carefully. Been thinking about your homestead claim. Willa's stomach tightened. What about it? I talked to some folks. Did some asking around. The land your father claimed, it is decent enough. Got a creek running through it, some timber. Could be made into something good with work. I know. I plan to go soon, start building before winter. That is what I figured. Hayes turned to look at her directly, his dark eyes serious. And I've been thinking you should not go alone. I do not have much choice in that. You do, though. He took a breath. I am saying I could go with you, help you get established, build a cabin, plow a field, get you set up properly. Willa stared at him. Why would you do that? You have a job at the Running Creek Ranch. Had a job, Hayes corrected. I gave notice last week. Been working there for 8 years, and it is good work, but it is not mine, you know, not building toward anything. I do not understand. Hayes ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration or nervousness. Willa could not tell which. I am saying this all wrong. He turned to face her fully. Willa, these past weeks, getting to know you, I have come to admire you. Your strength, your determination, the way you keep going even when everything is stacked against you. And I find myself thinking about you more than I should, worrying about you heading out to that claim alone, wishing I could be there to help." Willa's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Hayes, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give. I am just saying, let me help you. Let me come with you to that homestead and help you build something. If you want it to be just partnership, helping a neighbor, that is fine. But if you might want something more someday, well," he paused, "I would like that too." The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them on that porch, the sunset forgotten, everything else fading away. Willa thought about the past 6 weeks, about Hayes's steady presence, his kindness, the way she felt safe and seen when he was near. She thought about the long, lonely future she had been planning, alone on that homestead, surviving but not really living. "I would want you to have a share of the land," she said slowly. "Not just partnership, but real ownership. It would not be right otherwise." Hayes's expression shifted, hope brightening his eyes. "I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to buy supplies, livestock, seed. I could contribute that. We would be full partners then. Equal." "Equal," he agreed. Willa took a shaky breath. "And the other part, the something more." "That can go at whatever pace feels right to you," Hayes said. "I am not trying to rush you into anything. Just want you to know where I stand." She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His skin was warm and rough with calluses, familiar now after weeks of incidental touches while working together. "I care for you too. I have been trying not to, telling myself I had no room in my life for such things, but I do. I care for you, Hayes Fletcher." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, bright and warming everything it touched. He squeezed her hand gently. "So we do this together, partners." "Partners," Willa agreed, and the word felt like a promise. They began planning immediately, working out the logistics with the same practical determination they both brought to everything. Hayes officially left his position at the Running Creek Ranch, and the owner, a gruff but fair man named Mr. Carlson, gave Hayes a good bonus and a strong recommendation. Hayes used some of his savings to buy a wagon and a team of oxen, plus supplies for building and farming. Willa contributed what she had saved, and between them, they managed to outfit themselves reasonably well. Mrs. Patterson fussed over them like a mother hen, making sure they had sufficient food stores, blankets, and medical supplies. Reverend Thompson blessed their endeavor and made sure they had a Bible to take with them. Other townspeople contributed what they could: a milk cow from the Johnsons, some chickens from the Wilsons, seeds from various gardens, tools that people had spare. "This is what community means, Mrs. Patterson said as they loaded the wagon. "You are going off to build your life, but you are not alone. You will always have Fort Kearney to come back to if you need." The day they left was bright and clear, early September with the first hints of autumn cool in the morning air. Hayes drove the wagon while Willa sat beside him, and they followed the westward trail with a sense of purpose and possibility. The 40 miles would take several days, but they were in no rush, traveling at the oxen's steady pace, camping at night under the vast prairie sky. Those nights were revelatory for Willa. She had thought she knew Hayes, had thought she understood him, but traveling together showed her new dimensions. He was patient and methodical when setting up camp, efficient with fire building and cooking, careful about securing their supplies against wildlife. He told her stories about growing up in Missouri before his parents moved west, about his sister who had married and moved to California, about the dreams he had held close through years of working for someone else's ranch. In turn, Willa told him things she had never spoken aloud: how frightened she had been after her father died, how close she had come to giving up during those days alone in the wagon. How the sight of him riding through the rain had seemed like an answer to a prayer she had been too proud to pray. "I am glad I found you that day," Hayes said one night as they sat by the fire, the darkness pressing in around them. "I almost rode straight for town, almost did not take that route, but something told me to check that way, and there you were. Catching rainwater like a fool," Willa said wryly. "Like a survivor," Hayes corrected. "You were doing what you had to do, no shame in that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Hayes reached over and took her hand. It had become natural between them, these small touches, this growing intimacy that felt right and good and terrifying all at once. "Willa," he said quietly, "I want to court you properly, want to do this right. We are traveling alone together to a homestead we will share," she pointed out. "I think conventional propriety has already taken a beating." "Maybe so, but that does not mean I cannot respect you, cannot take my time and make sure you are sure about me, about us." She turned to look at him, this good man who had upended his entire life to help her, who treated her like an equal, who made her feel seen and valued in ways she had never experienced. "I am already sure, Hayes. I have been sure for weeks now. I was just afraid to say it." His hand tightened on hers. "Afraid of what? That it was too fast, that I was being foolish, that you would think I was just desperate for help and confusing gratitude with something more. And now I know the difference. This is not gratitude. This is something real." Hayes lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so tender it made Willa's breath catch. "It is real for me too. Has been almost from the start, if I am being honest." They reached the homestead claim on the 4th day of travel, and Willa felt her heart lift as they approached the land her father had chosen. Hayes had been right about it being good land. A creek ran clear and cold through the property, lined with cottonwoods and willows. There were gently rolling hills, adequate timber for building, and open stretches perfect for crops and grazing. The late summer grass grew tall and golden, and wildflowers still bloomed in patches of purple and yellow. "It is beautiful," Willa breathed. "It is home," Hayes said. "Or it will be." They made camp that first night near the creek, and the next morning, Hayes began surveying the land properly, determining the best location for a cabin. He chose a spot on a slight rise, protected from the north wind by a stand of trees, but with a clear view across the valley. "We will start here," he said. "Get the cabin up before serious cold sets in. We have maybe 6 weeks, 2 months if the weather holds. Then we can work on the barn and outbuildings come spring." They worked from sunup to sundown, and Willa discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. She helped Hayes fell trees and strip logs, learned how to notch the ends so they would stack properly, held timbers in place while he secured them. Her hands blistered and then calloused. Her back ached, but the cabin took shape, and with each wall that rose she felt pride swell in her chest. Hayes was endlessly patient, teaching her, working alongside her, never complaining about the hard labor. In the evenings, they would collapse by the fire, too tired to do much more than eat and talk quietly before sleep claimed them. But even exhausted, those moments felt precious. Hayes would sit close enough that their shoulders touched, and sometimes Willa would fall asleep with her head against his shoulder while he told her stories or sang old songs in a low, rough voice. 6 weeks after they arrived, the cabin stood complete. It was small and simple, just one room with a loft for sleeping, but it had a real floor, a stone fireplace Hayes had built with painstaking care, a door that hung straight and closed tight, and windows covered with oiled paper that let in light. They had even managed to build a small porch across the front. The day they moved their belongings inside, Willa stood in the center of the cabin and felt tears prick her eyes. "My father would have loved this," she said softly. Hayes came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. "We will make him proud. Make this place everything he dreamed it could be." That night, they celebrated with a better meal than usual: beans and salt pork and biscuits Willa made in the new fireplace. They sat on the porch watching the sun set over their land, and the sense of accomplishment was profound. "We should talk about sleeping arrangements," Hayes said carefully. "The loft is yours. I will make a bedroll down here by the fire. Hayes, that is your cabin too. You should not have to sleep on the floor." "I am not going to presume. I am not asking you to presume anything," Willa interrupted. "But you built that loft as much as I did. We can share it. There is room enough, and we are both adults." Hayes looked at her for a long moment. "You sure?" "I trust you. Is that not enough?" "More than enough." His voice was rough with emotion. So they fell into a new routine, sharing the small loft space, a respectful distance between them at first but gradually growing closer as the nights turned colder, and warmth became practical as much as desired. Willa found she slept better with Hayes nearby, his steady breathing a comfort in the darkness, his presence a bulwark against loneliness. October brought the first frost, and they worked frantically to prepare for winter. Hayes plowed a kitchen garden plot for spring, and they spent days digging a root cellar to store their supplies. They built a crude shelter for the oxen and cow, gathered firewood until they had a massive pile stacked against the cabin wall, and reinforced everything they could think of against the coming cold. One afternoon, Hayes rode into Fort Kearny to purchase additional supplies and returned with more than just goods. He brought a letter from the land office confirming the homestead claim was valid and properly filed, and he brought news that made Willa's heart race. "I talked to Reverend Thompson," he said, tying off the horses. "Asked him if he would be willing to travel out here to perform a marriage ceremony if the occasion arose." Willa, who had been sorting through the supplies, froze. "What did he say?" "He said he would be honored. Said to let him know whenever we are ready." Hayes came to stand in front of her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had rarely seen. "Willa Zimmerman, I know we have not been doing this in any conventional order. Built a home together before courting proper, shared a cabin before speaking vows. But I love you. I have loved you for months now, and I would be honored if you would consent to be my wife." Willa felt joy bloom in her chest, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she said, the word coming out half laugh, half sob. "Yes, of course, yes." Hayes pulled her into his arms, and she melted against him, feeling the solid strength of him, the rightness of being held this way. He tilted her chin up and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper, and Willa kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked. "Soon," Willa said. "Before winter sets in hard. I want to start our life together properly." They sent word to Fort Kearny, and 2 weeks later, Reverend Thompson made the journey out to their homestead along with Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Carlson from the Running Creek Ranch, and a handful of other friends they had made during Willa's time in town. The ceremony was simple, held on their porch with the prairie stretching out before them, the November sky bright and cold overhead. Willa wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved all these years, the ivory fabric cleaned and pressed. Hayes wore his best shirt and looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came, and when Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Hayes kissed her with a tenderness that made the small gathering cheer. Mrs. Patterson had brought a cake, an extravagance Willa knew had taken significant effort, and they all crowded into the little cabin to celebrate. It was warm and noisy and wonderful, and Willa felt a sense of belonging she had not known since her father died. These people had become her family, and this land had become her home, and Hayes was her future. After their guests departed, Hayes and Willa stood together on the porch watching the wagons disappear into the distance. Hayes wrapped his arms around her from behind and she leaned back against him. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I thought possible," Willa admitted. "A few months ago I was alone and catching rainwater to survive. Now I have all this, have you?" "I am the lucky one," Hayes said. "I found you when you needed help, but you saved me just as much. Gave me purpose, a home, a future worth building." That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that surprised them both. Hayes was patient and careful, making sure Willa felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together, it felt like the final piece of something clicking into place. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the loft, Hayes's hand tracing lazy patterns on her skin, and Willa felt complete in a way she had never experienced. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Hayes replied. "Always will." Winter arrived with a vengeance in late November, bringing snow that piled in drifts against the cabin walls and winds that howled through the nights. But inside, Hayes and Willa stayed warm, the fireplace burning steadily, their supplies holding out, their love deepening with each day. They played cards in the evenings, read aloud from their precious few books, talked about plans for spring planting, and made love with increasing confidence and joy. Occasionally, the isolation got to them, and they would snap at each other over small things whose turn it was to fetch water, how much firewood to use, whether the beans were getting low. But they learned to talk through their frustrations, to apologize and forgive, to recognize when cabin fever was speaking rather than genuine anger. One particularly brutal storm kept them inside for 3 days straight, and by the second day, Willa was pacing the cabin like a caged animal. "I feel like the walls are closing in," she said. Hayes looked up from the harness he was mending. "I know, but going out in that would be suicide. We waited out. I know, I need to do something. Come here." Hayes set aside his work and pulled her down onto his lap. "Tell me about your mother. You rarely speak of her." So Willa told him the little she remembered, the sound of her mother's singing voice, the way she smelled like lavender, the quilt she had made that Willa still treasured. Talking about her mother led to talking about her father, about his dreams and his determination, about how much he had wanted to create something lasting. "He would have liked you," Willa said, "would have respected your work ethic, your honesty." "I wish I could have met him," Hayes said. "Wish I could have asked his blessing properly. He would have given it, I am sure of that." The storm eventually passed, and they emerged to a world transformed by snow, clean and bright and beautiful. They dug out the cabin and the animal shelter, checked on the livestock, and then Hayes suggested something unexpected. "Let us go for a walk, just to see the land in the snow." They bundled up and trekked through the drifts, following the creek where it still flowed beneath a skin of ice. The cottonwoods were bare and stark, beautiful in their winter austerity. They saw deer tracks and rabbit trails, evidence of life continuing despite the cold. And when they reached a small rise that gave them a view back toward their cabin, smoke rising from its chimney, Hayes took Willa's mittened hand. "This is ours," he said. "Everything you see. We built it together and we will keep building it together. When times get hard, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what we have created." Willa squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat, and they stood together watching their home in the distance, two figures against the vast winter landscape together. Winter finally released its grip in late March, and they emerged into spring with plans and energy. Hayes plowed the fields while Willa planted the kitchen garden, and they worked in companionable rhythm. They added onto the animal shelter, turning it into a proper barn. They built a chicken coop and purchased more hens from a passing trader. They fenced a pasture and bought 2 more cows, planning for a small herd. The work was endless and exhausting, but they thrived on it. Hayes taught Willa how to handle the plow, and she taught him how to make better bread. They learned each other's rhythms, anticipating needs, working as a team that functioned with increasing efficiency. In late May, Willa missed her monthly courses. She did not say anything at first, not wanting to get Hayes's hopes up if she was wrong, but when another month passed, she knew. She was pregnant, she told him one evening after supper, simple and direct. "Hayes, I am with child." He went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth, and then he set it down carefully. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor, but yes, I am sure." A smile spread across his face, slow and wondering. "We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby," Willa confirmed. And then she was in his arms, being lifted and spun around the cabin while she laughed and told him to be careful and clung to him all at once. That night, Hayes was impossibly gentle with her, his hands reverent on her still flat stomach, his voice full of wonder as he talked about their future child. "Boy or girl does not matter to me, just want them healthy, want you healthy." "I am strong," Willa reminded him. "And we have months to prepare." "I should build a proper cradle," Hayes said, already planning. "And we will need more supplies, soft cloth, blankets. I will ride into Fort Kearny next week, make sure we have everything." "Hayes, we have time. I know, I just want everything to be perfect." Willa took his face in her hands. "It already is. We have each other, we have our home, and now we will have a child. What more could we need?" The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Willa worked alongside Hayes for as long as she was able, only reluctantly accepting his insistence that she take on less physical labor in the later months. Hayes was endlessly solicitous, bringing her water without being asked, making sure she rested, cooking meals when she was too tired. In October, nearly a full year after their wedding, Willa went into labor. Hayes rode like fury to Fort Kearny to fetch Mrs. Patterson, who had assisted at many births, and the older woman arrived with practiced calm and a bag of supplies. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Hayes paced outside the cabin, terrified by the sounds coming from within. But finally, in the gray light of dawn, his son was born. Mrs. Patterson brought the baby out, wrapped in a clean blanket, and placed him in Hayes's trembling arms. "You have a boy, strong lungs, good color. Your wife did beautifully." Hayes looked down at the tiny face, red and squalling, and felt love slam into him with physical force. "Can I see her? Give me a few minutes to get her settled, and then yes." When Hayes was finally allowed back inside, Willa was propped up in their bed, exhausted but smiling. He sat carefully beside her and placed their son in her arms, and they both stared down at him in wonder. "What should we call him?" Willa asked. They had discussed names for months but never settled on anything. Now, Hayes thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the rain and the well and the generosity of strangers who became family. "What about Parker?" he suggested. "After your father, his middle name." Tears filled Willa's eyes. Parker Fletcher. Yes, he would have loved that. Little Parker Fletcher proved to have strong lungs and a determined temperament, and he turned their quiet cabin into something noisier but infinitely richer. Hayes was a natural father, patient and gentle with his son, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor at night when Parker would not settle. Willa watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. The years rolled forward with the rhythm of seasons and hard work. They expanded their homestead, adding more buildings, more livestock, more fields. In the summer when Parker was 2, Willa discovered she was pregnant again, and the following spring they welcomed a daughter they named Alina, after Hayes's mother. 2 years after that came another boy, Thomas, and their family felt complete. The children grew up strong and capable, learning to work the land from the time they could walk. Parker was serious and thoughtful like his father, Alina was spirited and curious, and Thomas was the peacemaker, always trying to keep everyone happy. They were a noisy, messy, wonderful addition to the homestead, and Hayes and Willa would sometimes look at each other across the dinner table, surrounded by their children's chatter, and exchange smiles of pure contentment. Fort Kearny remained an important part of their lives. They made the journey to town several times a year for supplies and socializing, and their children became friends with the other families. Mrs. Patterson doted on them shamelessly, and Reverend Thompson taught them their letters during Sunday services. On one such trip to town, when Parker was 8, Alina 6, and Thomas 4, they stopped at the well in the town square to water the horses. Parker, always full of questions, asked his father why they called it the community well. Hayes glanced at Willa and she nodded, so he knelt down to his son's level. "Let me tell you a story about this well, about why it is important." He told them about finding Willa in the rain, about how she had been catching rainwater to survive, about leading her to Fort Kearny and showing her the well. "I told your mother, this is yours to use too, because I wanted her to know she was not alone anymore. That she had a place here, people who would help her." Alina piped up, "But Mother was not from here." "No," Willa said, joining the conversation, "but that did not matter. The people of Fort Kearny helped me anyway, just because I needed help." "And your father," she looked at Hayes with all the love in her heart. "Your father changed my entire life that day. Led me to water, yes, but also to a home, to a family, to a future I never could have imagined." "Because he was kind," Thomas said solemnly. "Because he was kind," Willa agreed. "And because he saw someone who needed help and chose to do something about it." They let the children play in the square while they finished their business in town, and Hayes pulled Willa aside for a moment, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The hard work, the isolation, all of it." Willa looked at their children laughing as they chased each other, looked at the town that had become their extended family, looked at the man beside her who had been her partner through every challenge and triumph. "Not for one single second. You gave me everything I needed when I had nothing, gave me hope and help and eventually love. How could I regret any of that?" "I feel the same," Hayes said. "That day I found you in the rain, I thought I was just helping someone in need. Did not realize I was finding my whole future." They gathered their children and supplies and made the journey back to their homestead, the wagon creaking under the weight of goods, the children chattering in the back. When they crested the final rise and their land spread out before them, the cabin they had built together, now expanded with additional rooms, the barn and outbuildings, the fields green with growing crops, the cattle grazing peacefully, Willa felt the same surge of pride and belonging she had felt that very first time. "Home," she said softly. "Home," Hayes agreed, and they rode down together into the life they had built. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes and challenges but never shaking the foundation Hayes and Willa had built. They added more rooms to the cabin as the children grew, eventually turning it into a proper house with separate bedrooms and even a parlor. They became prosperous by homesteader standards, their hard work paying off in good harvests and healthy livestock. Parker grew into a young man who loved the land as much as his parents did, already talking about filing his own claim someday nearby. Elinor developed a passion for horses and a gift for healing that had the local veterinarian taking her on as an apprentice. Thomas showed promise as a scholar, and Reverend Thompson suggested he might consider training for the ministry. Hayes and Willa watched their children's growth with pride and occasional melancholy, knowing that someday soon the nest would begin to empty. But they had each other, and the love between them had only deepened with time, weathered by hardship and sweetened by success. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Hayes surprised Willa by taking her back to the spot where he had first found her. They had not been there in years, but he had marked it in his memory. The old wagon was long gone, reclaimed by weather and time, but the place was still recognizable. 20 years ago, I rode through here in the rain and found the most stubborn, determined, beautiful woman I had ever seen, trying to catch rainwater in a tin cup, Hayes said, taking both her hands in his. Willa laughed, the sound as bright as the girl she had been, though her blonde hair was now threaded with silver and her face bore the lines of a life well lived. I was desperate and terrified and trying so hard to pretend I was neither. You were magnificent, Hayes corrected. And I fell in love with you probably right then, though it took me a while to realize it. You have given me everything, Willa. A home, a family, a purpose. Every day with you has been a gift. You gave me those things too, Willa said, tears pricking her eyes. Led me to the well and told me it was mine to use too, told me I belonged. I had been alone for so long, and you made me part of something bigger, made me your partner, your wife, the mother of your children. How do I even begin to thank you for that? You do not have to thank me. Just keep loving me. Keep being exactly who you are. That is the easiest promise I have ever made, Willa said, and kissed him there in the fading light, on the spot where their story had truly begun. They returned home as darkness fell, and their children had prepared a celebration dinner, the table laden with food and laughter. Friends and neighbors had been invited, filling their house with noise and warmth. Mrs. Patterson was there, ancient now but still sharp, and she pulled Willa aside during the party. I remember the day Hayes brought you to my boarding house, the old woman said. Half drowned, half starved, and full of determination. I knew then you were special. And I knew Hayes was smitten, though he tried to hide it. He told me he just wanted to help, Willa said. Men always say that when they are falling in love and do not quite realize it yet, Mrs. Patterson said with a knowing smile. But I saw it, saw the way he looked at you even then. Like you were something precious he had found and was determined to protect. We protected each other, Willa said, still do. That is what makes it work. You are partners in the truest sense, equal. That is rare and beautiful, child. You hold on to it. I will, always. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Hayes and Willa stood on their porch, waving goodbye, their children already cleaning up inside. The prairie stretched out before them under a canopy of stars, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. 20 more years. Hayes asked, wrapping his arm around her waist. At least, Willa said. Maybe 40, maybe forever. Forever sounds about right. They stood there together. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had built something lasting from nothing, who had loved each other through every season and would continue to do so for whatever time remained. The well in Fort Kearney still flowed clean and cold. The rain still fell when the land needed it, and the homestead they had claimed together would pass to their children and grandchildren, a legacy of hard work and enduring love. In the end, Hayes had not just led Willa to water that day in the rain. He had led her to hope, to home, to a future beyond mere survival. And she had given him the same a reason to build, to stay, to love. They had saved each other. two souls meeting at exactly the right moment, and they had created something beautiful together. Inside the house, Alina called out that the last of the dishes were done, and Hayes and Willa turned to go inside to their family, to the life they had made. But at the doorway, Hayes paused and looked back at the land one more time. "Thank you," Willa said softly. "For what? For stopping that day. For not riding past. For showing me I did not have to do everything alone." Hayes pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was always going to stop. Something told me I had to, like fate was pointing me in your direction." "Maybe it was," Willa said. "Maybe we were always meant to find each other. I like that idea. Destiny." "Me too." They went inside together, closing the door on the prairie night, and the house glowed warm with lamplight and love. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, and the creek ran steady and clear, and the land they had tamed and loved held them all safely. The well in Fort Kearney would still be there tomorrow, available to anyone who needed it, just as it had been available to Willa all those years ago. And she had learned what Hayes had tried to tell her that first day, that she did not have to catch rainwater anymore, did not have to survive alone. She had a community, a family, a partner who would walk beside her through whatever came. She had been given access to more than just water that day. She had been given access to a life worth living, and she had seized it with both hands. 20 years later, she was still holding on, still building, still loving. And she would continue to do so for as long as breath remained in her body, because Hayes Fletcher had shown her that she mattered, that she belonged, that the well was hers to use too. Everything else had grown from that single moment of kindness in the rain. The children eventually went to bed, and Hayes and Willa climbed to their loft, still their favorite place despite the house's expansion. They undressed and slipped under the quilts, and Hayes pulled her close against his chest, her head tucked under his chin, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long practice. "Happy anniversary," he murmured into her hair. "Happy anniversary," she replied. "Here is to 20 more." "To 20 more," he agreed. "To 40 more, to however many we get. To us," Willa whispered. "To us," Hayes echoed, and they fell asleep together. Two hearts beating in rhythm, two lives perfectly intertwined, a love story that had started with rainwater and a well, and had grown into something vast and enduring as the prairie itself. The morning came bright and clear, as mornings do, and they woke to the sounds of their children starting the day's chores. Hayes kissed Willa's forehead and rose to dress, and she watched him, this man who had given her everything, who still looked at her with love and desire even after 20 years, who was her best friend and partner and the other half of her soul. "What are you smiling about?" he asked, catching her expression. "Just thinking how lucky I am," Willa said. "We are both lucky," Hayes corrected. "Found each other against all odds. That is not luck. That is a miracle." They went downstairs together to join their children, to begin another day of work and life and love on the homestead they had carved from wilderness. And if occasionally Willa thought back to that desperate girl catching rainwater in a tin cup, she did so with compassion and pride. That girl had survived. That girl had persevered. That girl had accepted help when it was offered and had built something magnificent from those ashes. She was not that girl anymore, but she carried her inside the determination, the strength, the refusal to give up. Those qualities had served her well through 2 decades of homesteading, motherhood, partnership. And they would continue to serve her through whatever years remained. Hayes caught her hand as they walked outside to survey their land, and she squeezed back, a silent communication of love and gratitude and commitment. They had come so far from that rainy day in Nebraska, had built so much together, and they were not done yet. There were still fields to plant, livestock to tend, children to raise and love to give. The well in Fort Kearney still stood, available to all who needed it. The rain still fell when the land called for it. And Hayes and Willa Fletcher still walked their land hand in hand, partners in every sense, proof that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest act of kindness, leading someone to water and saying, "This is yours to use too." Their story had started with survival and grown into something far greater. It had encompassed hardship and triumph, loneliness and community, desperation and hope. And at its heart had always been love, the kind of love that works, that builds, that endures through seasons and years, and whatever challenges life presents. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Hayes and Willa stood together on the porch they had built with their own hands, looking out over the life they had created. 3 children, a prosperous homestead, 20 years of marriage, and a love that showed no signs of fading. "No regrets?" Hayes asked, as he had asked before. "Not a single one," Willa replied, as she always did. My only regret is that I did not find you sooner," Hayes said. "But then again, maybe the timing was perfect. Maybe we needed to be exactly who we were, exactly when we were, to make this work." "I think you are right," Willa said. "Everything happened exactly as it was meant to." They went inside to breakfast, to the chaos of family life, to the endless work that homesteading demanded. But they went together, as they had done everything since that day in the rain. Together they had built a home, raised a family, carved out a life from harsh land. Together they had loved and laughed and sometimes cried. Together they had created something lasting, and it had all started with the simplest of gestures, a cowboy leading a desperate woman to a well and telling her it was hers to use too. From that moment, everything had changed. From that moment, everything had become possible. The end.